Hi there, I'm Jenny. 2 weeks before my wedding, I found a note on my parents' kitchen counter. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. No call, no explanation, just silence. But that wasn't the worst part. They used my wedding plans for someone else. My own sister. My money, my venue, even my dress. Reassigned like I was never part of it. What kind of family does that? And what happened 48 hours later? I promise it changed everything. I arrived at my parents' house earlier than usual that morning. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting that soft, dim orange light across the windows of the quiet Charleston neighborhood. I'd planned to drop off the final cake samples and the newly printed invitations before heading into work. Everything had been scheduled down to the hour these last few weeks, and I'd been careful not to overstep, especially with my mother. I let myself in through the side door like I always had. No voices, no faint sound of the television humming in the background, not even the soft clink of my mom's favorite teacup. The house felt still. Then I saw it. A single sheet of paper lay folded in half on the kitchen counter, right where my mother usually left cheerful post-it notes, reminders about flower pickups or seating charts. But this wasn't her usual handwriting. This wasn't blue ink with loopy curves. This was black, sharp, and cold. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. That was it. No greeting, no signature, no damn explanation. For a moment, my body just froze. No breath, no movement. My mind went silent, as if it couldn't process the fact that 7 words had just detonated everything I had been planning for the last year. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even text my fiancé, Jace. Instead, I picked up my phone and typed one word back to my mother. Understood. I drove home in complete silence. The roads were almost empty, but I couldn't hear the hum of the engine or the soft thuds of tires over pavement. It felt like my body had gone somewhere else and left me behind to deal with the wreckage. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't call anyone. I sat on the edge of my couch, still in my shoes, replaying every conversation from the past month. What had I missed? Was it when I disagreed about the number of guests? Or when I told Karen she couldn't bring a +1 she'd just started dating? No. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a tantrum. Someone had planned this. By nightfall, I still hadn't heard from them. Not one call. Not even a follow-up to that note. But I got something else. A message from my cousin, Courtney, popped up on my screen. Hey, I think this was meant for someone else, but it showed up in my email. You should see it. Attached was a screenshot of a group chat titled, Monroe Family Wedding Changes. My heart pounded as I scanned the names. Julia, Karen, Lyle. They'd been planning a restructured celebration. The same venue. The same guest list. Just with Karen. Karen, my younger sister, recently engaged, was now the centerpiece of the event that was once mine. The florist's invoice had been updated, replacing my name. The photographer's new draft timeline listed Karen and Zach as the couple. I wasn't just removed. I was replaced. I stared at the screen, reading the same message over and over. Karen had even joked in one message, "At least now the photos will be cute." My mom replied with a heart emoji. My fingers trembled. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the kind of fury that only comes when someone peels your skin off slowly while smiling to your face. The worst part? I had let them manage the venue. I'd trusted them with the deposits, the accounts, the scheduling, because they were family. Because they told me it was easier that way. Easier to erase me? I thought back to the time Mom insisted we pick a neutral dress. Something simple, she'd said, so you don't overshadow the room. Or when Dad told me he'd handle the final payment. Don't worry, sweetie, we've got it covered. But this wasn't about cost. It wasn't about preferences or logistics. This was intentional. They didn't just pull the rug out from under me. They'd wrapped me in it and dragged me out the door while replacing me with a smile. And they didn't think I'd fight back. They'd miscalculated, badly. I opened a new folder on my laptop titled, For the Record. Screenshots, receipts, messages. I began dragging everything in, one by one. No one would believe me without proof. But I wasn't doing this to convince anyone. I was doing it to protect myself. From this day forward. Because now I understood something I should have realized a long time ago. They never planned to share the spotlight with me. I was just a filler until someone better came along. As I stared at that digital folder, starting to fill with evidence, my voice came out barely louder than a breath. They think I won't fight. That's the only part they got wrong. I didn't always stay silent. I used to fight back, until they taught me it wasn't worth it. Over the years, I learned that arguing with people who pretended I mattered only when they needed something was like pouring water into a cracked vase. Useless. And now, with that folder filling up on my laptop, I sat motionless, letting memories drift in like fog over the marshes. 2 weeks before that note appeared on the kitchen counter, I had a dress-fitting appointment downtown. It was at the boutique Julia insisted we use, the same one she had bragged about going to when she was my age. I was nervous that day, not because of the dress, but because I knew Julia wouldn't show up. She'd already started pulling back, canceling phone calls, skipping vendor meetings. But I clung to the possibility that maybe this moment would bring us together again. She didn't come, but someone else did. Karen. She strolled in late, latte in hand, fake surprised. "Oh, I didn't know you were here today," she said, flashing that rehearsed smile I'd seen her use on waiters and gym trainers. The boutique owner looked confused. "You're not the bride?" Karen laughed like it was all a big mix-up. "Not today," she said. "I was just nearby and thought I'd peek in." She sat on the velvet bench and started scrolling through her phone. I remember standing there, half in my dress, staring at her like she'd just stepped into my reflection. When I walked out of the fitting room to look in the mirror, she snapped a photo. "Lighting is perfect in here," she said, not even asking. I should have walked out then. The next day, the boutique emailed me. "Final adjustments complete per updated measurements. Order ready for pickup under Karen Monroe." They had taken my dress. Not metaphorically, literally. My name wasn't on the invoice anymore. And the boutique said it was per family request. Family. I didn't respond. I just sat at my kitchen table for hours, fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that went cold twice. At some point, I opened the boutique's Instagram out of habit, and there it was. A reel. A perfectly curated little montage, tagged with autumn leaves, and the caption, "So happy for Karen. Perfect fall wedding." I watched it. Karen walked down the aisle in my dress. In my venue. With my string quartet playing the same piece I'd handpicked for my entrance. Every frame glowed like a magazine spread. Julia and Lyle beamed with pride. They toasted champagne. They hugged Karen like she was the crown jewel of the family. And not once was I mentioned. Not a thank you. Not a photo tucked into a corner. Not even a tag on social media. I wasn't even a ghost at the party. I stared at the screen in stunned silence. The comments rolled in beneath the video like confetti. "She's glowing!" "Julia raised such a beautiful bride." "This family knows how to throw a wedding." The irony nearly made me laugh. That night, I waited until the apartment fell quiet again before I picked up the phone. I dialed Jace. He was in Atlanta, finishing up a last-minute project. I hadn't told him about the note yet, or the video. I wanted to protect him from the mess. But I also knew he had a right to know. His voice came on the line, calm but cautious. "Jenny, I was starting to worry." I swallowed hard. "You didn't see it yet, did you?" "See what?" I paused. "Never mind, just... They canceled it, my parents. Left me a note." "What?" His voice dropped. "They canceled our wedding?" "Not canceled," I said. "Hijacked. They gave it to Karen." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, evenly, "Do you want to sue them?" I breathed in slowly. "Not yet. But I've started saving everything." There was something about saying it aloud that made it more real. It grounded me. Jace didn't need to say anything else. He just listened. And in that moment, I was grateful for silence that didn't feel like rejection. After we hung up, I sat alone in the living room, Lights dimmed. Just me and the soft blue glow of my laptop. I clicked play on the reel again. Frame by frame, I watched it. Karen twirling on the dance floor in the lace I paid for. Julia holding her hands to her chest, pretending to cry. Lyle clinking glasses with Zach like nothing in the world had ever been complicated. Then came the toast. Julia stood up at the head table, glass raised, camera catching every angle of her glistening eyes. "To the daughter who made the family proud," she said. I hit pause. My finger hovered over the spacebar, but I couldn't press it again. That one sentence echoed louder than the string quartet ever could. I rewound it, listened again. Not a daughter, not our daughters, just the daughter. She was right, though. Karen had made them proud, because she played the game. She kept her mouth shut. She never challenged their decisions. She smiled when they told her who to love, what to wear, where to go. I used to think I was the rebellious one, the disappointment, but maybe all I ever did wrong was try to live a life they couldn't control. I closed the laptop slowly, the faint click of the lid settling into silence. "They think they erased me," I whispered, "but I'm the only one who remembers everything." My laptop stayed closed on the kitchen table long after the screen went black. I sat still, surrounded by silence that didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt loaded, like the kind of silence that waits to see if you'll finally snap. I didn't, not yet. Instead, I got up, walked to the drawer I rarely touched, and pulled out my old phone, the cracked one I stopped using after I got promoted. It was mostly dead weight now, but it still had photos, voicemails, and voice memos from years ago. I told myself I was looking for something practical, maybe old vendor quotes or a contact from my early wedding planning. But deep down, I was hunting for proof I wasn't losing my mind. Something that reminded me this didn't come out of nowhere. I scrolled through the folders until one labeled Holiday Dinner 2021 caught my eye. My finger hovered. That Thanksgiving had been odd. Julia was unusually quiet. Karen kept going on about a marketing job she hadn't even accepted yet. Dad was glued to the football game. I remembered stepping out to take a walk around the block, needing air after Karen snapped at me for always being so sensitive. Apparently, I had left my phone recording on the table by mistake. When I pressed play, the background clinks of silverware filled the room again. Then Julia's voice. Too casual, too smooth. "She's a sweet girl," she said, and I already knew she meant me. "But she's just not like Karen, not driven, not special. She's fine." That word, fine, cut deeper than anything vulgar ever could. It wasn't rage or rejection. It was dismissal, like I was a bland wallpaper in their home. Not worth changing, not worth admiring. "She doesn't push herself. She's content, and that's okay. But Karen has potential." I stopped the recording. I didn't need to hear more. My face didn't flush. My heart didn't pound. I just sat there, jaw clenched, staring out the window as a group of kids biked down the street, laughing freely. So this was the story they'd told themselves for years, that I was fine, and therefore not worth fighting for. But it hadn't always been like that. There was a time, brief as it was, when I pushed back. Colton. 6 years ago, he had been the first person I ever let in fully. The kind of man who planned weekend trips and surprised me with used books he thought I'd like. I remember the afternoon he invited me to Edisto Beach, just the two of us. We were supposed to leave Friday morning. Instead, I woke up to a message. "Jenny, I'm sorry. I can't do this. I think your family was right. I'm not enough." No fight, no second chance. Just silence after that. For years, I believed he'd simply fallen out of love. Maybe found someone easier. But as I sat now, the words from that old voicemail echoed differently. My family was right. He didn't say, "You were wrong." He said they were right. Back then, I couldn't accept it. So I buried it. Never told anyone, not even Jace. I reached for my water glass and stared at the condensation trail it left on the table. I wasn't crying. There weren't any tears left for this version of myself. Instead, I stood and walked to the cabinet above the fridge. That's where I kept the documents. The mortgage I signed alone, the receipts from the wedding venue, a printed spreadsheet Julia insisted on managing. To keep things in order, she had said. Every page I pulled confirmed something deeper than mismanagement. This wasn't chaos. It was strategy, the kind that erased me slowly, so by the time I noticed, I'd already disappeared. They'd taken my wedding, my voice, my dress. What else had they stolen in the name of family? The worst part wasn't what I found. It was how easy it was to find. A clean sweep. No record of deposits made under my name. No recognition of my work. The guest list, edited weeks ago, had my email removed. The floral arrangements were now listed under Karen M. My entire presence, scrubbed. I whispered the question again as I sat back down, a whisper that didn't feel rhetorical anymore. What else have they taken? And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for asking. That moment of stillness was broken by the sharp ring of my phone. Unknown number. I usually let those go, but this time, something in my gut made me press accept. Jenny? The voice asked, nervous, familiar. I didn't answer right away. It's Colton, he said. I heard about your wedding, and I thought, maybe you should know more about what happened back then. The room spun slightly, not from surprise, but from recognition. This wasn't a ghost returning. It was a piece of the puzzle I'd never been allowed to hold. I leaned forward, pressing my palm to my forehead. A familiar ache built behind my eyes. I kept my voice calm. I'm listening. Colton didn't hesitate once I said I was listening. She threatened me, Jenny. I didn't know what else to do. His voice cracked, but I didn't speak. I needed the full story, not comfort. She didn't just tell me to back off. She called my office, my manager, said I was involved with someone who had mental instability, that you were emotionally fragile, needed constant care, and that our relationship was affecting your health, that I was contributing to it. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, steadying myself. My knuckles ached from how tight my hand clenched the phone. I said nothing, but inside, something collapsed. Not like a building that falls, more like a dam that quietly cracks, piece by piece, until the flood becomes unstoppable. She said if I really loved you, I'd walk away so you could focus on yourself. And I believed her. I thought I was doing the right thing. He paused. I could hear it, the regret, the weight he'd been carrying all these years. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. My voice came out calm, nearly flat. It doesn't, I said. But thank you for telling me. We exchanged no goodbyes. I hung up, placed the phone on the table, and stared at the window, where the streetlight outside glowed over empty pavement. Then I picked up my own thoughts like shards on a tile floor, fitting them into something resembling a timeline. The pattern was clear now, not just in hindsight, but in cold, deliberate detail. Control. Julia didn't just block my path, she bulldozed it and then told me I had no sense of direction. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold. My fingers hovered over Jace's contact. He hadn't reached out in days, and I'd been grateful for the space. But now, I needed answers only he could give. When he picked up, his tone was cautious. Hey, he said. I need you to be honest with me, I said, and I need you to do it now. There was a pause, just long enough for me to imagine him sitting on his couch, hand on his forehead, like he always did when he felt cornered. I know what this is about, he said, and you're right to ask. He told me about the day he went to my parents' house, months before he proposed. She called me into the sunroom. Your dad wasn't there. She had a folder, said it was something to help me make the right choice before the engagement. He sighed. Inside were copies of your old credit statements from years ago, notes about your panic attacks after college, even your ER bill from when you fainted at work. She told me she kept them for emergencies. And the prenup? I asked. Jace hesitated. She had one drafted. Said it was just precaution. To protect the family's assets in case things didn't work out. Did you sign it? No, but I also didn't tell you. I didn't want to cause a rift. A rift. As if there hadn't already been a canyon. Thank you, I said, and ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. I stood up, walked into my bedroom, and pulled the small metal box from the back of my closet. Inside were the documents Julia had always said to hold on to, just in case. The venue deposit confirmation. It had my name on it. The floral arrangement invoice had come through my nonprofit's account, the one I opened 5 years ago. And at the very bottom, folded neatly in a cream envelope, was the budgeting agreement she'd handed me 2 months ago. I had signed it without much thought. Back then, she said it was to help keep expenses organized. What I held now, though, was no budgeting guide. It was a contract, a silent transfer of assets, a neat little tool to move things out of my hands and into Karen's. I stared at the signature line. Mine. Above a line that said, Authorized financial reassignment for family redistribution purposes. They didn't just cancel my wedding, they reallocated my life. I returned to the living room and dropped the papers on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I moved with a new kind of focus, one I hadn't felt in a long time. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, and labeled it Restitution. Then I opened my email. To Julia.Monroe. Subject: This ends now. The body was short, sharp, precise. You've taken enough from me. If you continue, I will take back everything. Legally, publicly, permanently. Consider this your last warning. I clicked send. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Not because I was done, but because I had finally started. I didn't wait for her reply. I shut the laptop, pushed my chair back, and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to creep over the edge of the rooftops, casting that strange gray-blue light across the empty street outside. The kind of light that feels like a warning. I stood there longer than I meant to, arms folded, heartbeat steady but hard. I wasn't expecting peace, not from them, not from this. But I thought maybe, just maybe, the silence would last a little longer. It didn't. A buzz from my phone dragged my eyes down to the screen. Notification from Facebook. Karen had posted something. I hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen. Then I tapped. Her post was long, crafted. The kind of message someone spends time rehearsing, not just in writing, but in the mirror, over breakfast, while twisting a wedding ring she didn't earn. She called me unstable, accused me of fabricating stories, of having a long-standing pattern of emotional volatility. She claimed I was undermining the unity of the family and lashing out because I couldn't handle not being the center of attention. Julia had liked the post. Lyle left a heart reaction. My stomach turned. But I didn't cry. I didn't pace or shout or throw the phone like I would have years ago. Instead, I opened my screenshot tool, captured the post, the comments, the timestamps, saved them into the folder titled Restitution. If they thought this would break me, they hadn't been paying attention. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the post again, not to read it, but to study the responses. Former family friends chiming in, most of them vague but loaded. So sorry you're going through this, Karen. Or, some people just can't let go of the past. They were trying to shame me into silence, but they didn't realize I had stopped playing their game. I tapped Marla's contact. She answered on the second ring. Jen? Her voice was tight, cautious. Hey, I saw Karen's post. You okay? There was a pause. I saw it, I replied. I was wondering if you'd want to meet up. I could really use a familiar face. Marla inhaled sharply, then exhaled like she was about to deliver news no one wants to say out loud. I don't think that's a good idea, she said. Your mom's. People listen to her, Jenny. She helped my cousin get into that law firm. And after that thing with your aunts, well, I can't risk it. I blinked. No hard feelings, she added quickly. It's just complicated. I thanked her anyway, hung up, and I sat there for a while, letting that moment settle, not as betrayal, but as confirmation. Julia's power didn't stop at the front door. It ran through the veins of this town, like a quiet current no one dared swim against. I took my time that afternoon, did the dishes, cleaned the bathroom, watered the succulents by the windowsill, let the silence stretch, not out of avoidance, but because I needed the space to think without their noise. At dusk, I picked up the phone again. This time, I called Karen. She answered like she'd been expecting it. Finally decided to talk? I'm only going to say this once, I said, keeping my voice low and even. Take down the post. There was a beat of silence, then laughter. Not the amused kind, the mean kind. The kind she used in high school when she knew she had backup. You can't seriously think anyone believes you now, she said. You sound paranoid, just like Mom said. I'm not asking for belief, I said. I'm asking for space. If you keep this up, I won't stay quiet. And I won't just defend myself. I'll dismantle every version of this family you're clinging to. Is that a threat? She snapped. No, I said. That's a boundary. The difference is, I'll keep mine. Whether you keep yours is up to you. I ended the call before she could respond. 2 hours later, as the sky dimmed into a soft purple haze, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the peephole. A man in uniform, holding an envelope. Courier delivery for Jenny Monroe. I signed, thanked him, and closed the door. The envelope was heavy, thick paper. I sat on the couch, slid a finger under the seal, and pulled out a neatly folded document. Legal notice of removal. Beneficiary revocation. The language was formal, cold, bullet-pointed. As of this date, Jenny Monroe is hereby removed from all family estate considerations, including property, financial trusts, and personal assets managed by the Monroe Family Trust. No reasons listed. At the bottom, in clean, slanted ink, was a single closing line. As of now, you are no longer considered part of this family's future. I stared at it, felt no rush of heat, no bile at the back of my throat, just a long, slow breath leaving my chest. I folded the paper carefully, set it on the table next to the screenshots, then stood up and walked toward my desk. They thought they'd buried me, but all they'd done was draw a line, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to step over it. I didn't sit down right away. My legs carried me to the cabinet across the room, the one I'd avoided opening since last winter. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old holiday cards and unopened scented candles, sat a worn black binder and a hard drive labeled Finances Backup. I laid them both on the kitchen table and opened my laptop. There were 2 versions of myself stored inside that spreadsheet. The woman they saw, scattered, unfocused, always a step behind. And the woman they didn't, meticulous, prepared, quiet because she knew numbers never needed to shout. It took nearly 3 hours to go line by line. I revisited every Venmo transaction Karen ever requested with the word urgent, every bank draft where I covered their utilities, just until Dad's bonus clears, every florist receipt from the venue they claimed I hadn't paid for. By the time I was done, the total sat just above $38,000. I printed the pages, slipped them into plastic sleeves, and filled the binder. Then I labeled it Ledger of Record. I wasn't building a case. I was building a wall they couldn't pretend not to see. Around noon the next day, I stepped out for a walk, just to clear my head. I didn't get 2 blocks before my phone vibrated. Login failed. Shared Dropbox folder, Monroe Family Planning. Another buzz followed. Access revoked. Joint house account. I stopped in my tracks. The sidewalk felt narrower somehow. The world didn't tilt, it just clarified. I called the bank immediately, pressing 0 until I reached a human. I need to confirm activity on an account I co-managed, I said. giving the details flatly. The rep pulled it up. There was a change submitted last night. A power of attorney form from Mr. Lyle Monroe, revoking your co-ownership. Was it notarized? Yes, ma'am. Then you'll need to see my file, I said. I'm sending over documents now. Until you sort this out, freeze the account. That money is in dispute. She hesitated, but my tone didn't. Within 20 minutes, the freeze was confirmed. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something sharper, like setting a bone that had healed crooked and finally snapping it into place. Back home, I made another folder. Titled it, In Case of Public Denial. Inside it went everything that proved my version of this story wasn't a narrative. It was a timeline. Text messages from Karen promising repayment. Email threads with Julia discussing shared costs. Digital contracts signed under my name for venue services, now credited to them. I didn't plan to post them, but I wanted them ready. People like my family didn't fear confrontation. They feared being unmasked, not with emotion, but with receipts. And that was the one thing I'd always kept. I closed the laptop, stood up, and made tea. The act was simple, mundane even, but it steadied me. My hands didn't shake as I poured. My breath didn't hitch when I sat back down. I wasn't waiting for them to fix it anymore. I wasn't even waiting for justice. I was laying brickwork. At 8:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the area code, my old banker's office. I answered on the second ring. Ms. Monroe? Yes. This is Allison from McAllister Financial. I think it would be best if you came in tomorrow. We received a document this morning. It lists your signature, but something about it didn't sit right with me. What kind of document? It references property reassignment, partial title transfer on a home under the Monroe family umbrella. We flagged it because your existing file shows no prior authorization. My chest didn't tighten, my voice didn't rise. Do you still have it? Yes. Keep it secure. I'll be in at 9. She paused. You'll want to bring any legal paperwork that contradicts what we received. I looked at the binder sitting on my kitchen table. I've got plenty. After the call, I turned off all the lights except one over the sink. I stood there for a moment, the glow catching the edge of the binder's spine. They'd taught me to be polite, to not raise my voice, to apologize even when I wasn't wrong. But they never taught me what to do when I stopped caring what they thought. And now they'd picked the wrong thing to forge. Morning broke with the kind of chill that didn't come from the weather. My shoes echoed through the office lobby, muted by the heavy carpet, but my steps were precise. I'd worn navy, clean, professional, forgettable. I didn't need to stand out today. I needed to stand tall. At 9:26 a.m., our front desk buzzed. Jenny? Sharon, the receptionist, called across the open space. There's a delivery for you. I turned toward her just as a man in a gray blazer stepped into view, holding a document tube and a clipboard. Jenny Monroe? He asked, expression neutral. I nodded. You've been served. He placed the envelope in my hands, had me sign, and left before I could say a word. I walked back to my desk slowly, sat down, and peeled the seal open. Civil complaint, Monroe vs. Monroe. I scanned it. Paragraphs of inflated claims. They accused me of embezzling family funds intended for the original wedding. Claimed I had authorized venue upgrades outside agreed budgets, that I'd suffered repeated emotional instability that rendered me unfit to manage financial matters. My name was twisted into a caricature of chaos. The lawsuit didn't just seek money, it sought to label me untrustworthy, volatile, dangerous. Around me, the office hummed too quietly. I felt eyes flick toward me and away just as quickly. I closed the packet, opened my email, and typed, Subject, Defamation claim, Monroe family. Add this filing to our counterclaim. Defamation, malicious intent, reputational damage. Let's respond swiftly. I didn't need revenge that made noise. I needed revenge that came with a docket number. That afternoon, The door of the past opened wide. A call came through to my work line from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Jenny." "Jenny, it's Victor Lang." I leaned back. Victor had been my mother's PR shield for as long as I could remember. He'd been the man who spun Julia's missteps into inspirational quotes, the one who'd told newspapers that our family was resilient when whispers of misused funds at her charity circled 10 years ago. Now, he sounded like someone playing both sides. "I just wanted to reach out," he said, smoothing his tone like a politician, "and say, you might want to let this play out quietly. Sometimes the noise dies faster if you don't feed it." "You're worried about Julia's image," I replied. "You should be. It's hanging by a thread, and this time, she's the one who handed me the scissors." There was a pause. A deep inhale. "Jenny, these things spiral. Be smart." "I am being smart. That's what scares you." I ended the call. That evening, I stayed off social media. But the universe didn't return the favor. My phone buzzed with a notification. Julia Monroe posted a new status update. I didn't click right away. I waited. Took a sip of the chamomile tea I didn't want, but had made out of habit. Then I opened it. "It's hard being a mother," it began. "You try to raise your children with compassion. You sacrifice. You guide. But sometimes, when pain twists a child's view, all they can see is betrayal, where there was once love." There was no name, but everyone knew who it was about. The comments poured in. People from church, neighbors from our old block, Karen's new in-laws. "She's lucky to have you as a mother." "Some kids just turn bitter no matter what you give them." "I've seen this before. It's the money. Always the money." I printed the post, all 57 comments, highlighted names, took screenshots of every mutual connection who clicked like. Then I handed them to my attorney. "Don't respond," she said. "I won't, but you will." We began outlining our timeline. When Karen first asked for the deposit loan, when Julia sent me the budget spreadsheet that later reallocated assets, when the house was listed with my name on the agreement, when the Dropbox folder was mysteriously wiped. I didn't need to argue with strangers online. I had a courtroom. 3 days later, an email came through just after breakfast. "Court date confirmed. Monroe vs. Monroe, Civil Division, Room 204. Hearing set for 3 weeks out." I stared at the date. Then, my reflection in the kitchen window, blurred by the morning haze. They wanted to embarrass me, silence me, redefine me. But the only thing they'd accomplished was sharpening my resolve. I turned from the window and spoke out loud to no one but myself. "You want a public fight? Fine, but I'm bringing every truth you buried." After I closed the email confirming the court date, I didn't sit down. I didn't scroll through more evidence or rehearse possible questions. I walked straight to the living room window, pulled back the curtain, and stared out into the quiet, early evening stillness. The streetlights flickered on as the sky dimmed, and I stood there in silence, one hand gripping the edge of the curtain, the other resting against my thigh, steady and warm. This was no longer about my wedding. It hadn't been for a while. This was about years of being told what I was allowed to want, and who I was allowed to be. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I titled it simply, Truth. Then I wrote the first post. No preamble, no emotional introduction, just a headline. My name is Jenny Monroe, and here's what they erased. Underneath, I dropped in screenshots, one by one. Bank transfers from my account to Karen's over the past 5 years, labeled venue deposit, catering emergency, travel reimbursement. The agreement my mother had handwritten, initialed JM, with promises to reimburse half the wedding expenses once family stability was achieved. A clipped video, shaky from my phone camera, of Julia sitting in my apartment kitchen last spring. Her voice low, sharp. If you love him, you'll sign it. If you don't, you'll destroy everything we've built for you. Do you want to be another mistake? I added the Venmo trail. The florist invoice with both our names, but only my signature. the guest list with red lines over my friends' names. No commentary, no hashtags, just cold, careful documentation. I hit post and turned off the screen. When I woke up at 6:20 the next morning, the thread had been shared over 3,000 times. Comments rolled in faster than I could read. Strangers, former classmates, quiet supporters, who had watched from the sidelines for years, and people asking questions. Why would a family do this to their daughter? Jenny, you're not alone. This is what generational manipulation looks like. At 7:02 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I picked up anyway. Jenny, Karen's voice said, brittle and shaking. What the hell are you doing? I'm telling the truth, I said simply. You've made Mom look bad. You've made all of us look damaged. I waited. You think the internet is going to fix this? She hissed. You think they'll love you for tearing us apart in public? No, I replied calmly. I think they'll understand that I stopped letting someone else define me. There was silence. Then I added, she tore us apart behind closed doors. I just stopped pretending it didn't happen. I ended the call, then blocked the number. By noon, my lawyer called to confirm we were ready to submit the final counterclaim. I added the new evidence, she said. Are you sure you want to include the notarized statement from the accountant? Yes, I answered. She was complicit. She gets named. That document had been a surprise. An old family accountant had come forward quietly after reading my post. She had resigned years ago, citing health reasons. In her notarized letter, she confirmed that Julia had rerouted donations meant for a charity account, set up under my name, into a separate trust controlled solely by her and my father. She included dates, transfer logs, even scanned copies of altered receipts. This wasn't just an ugly divorce from my family. It was financial fraud, on paper, in ink, and all of it had my name tied to it, without my consent. The updated counterclaim listed breach of fiduciary duty, financial misrepresentation, emotional distress, unjust enrichment. We printed it on ivory stock and had it hand-delivered. I didn't check Facebook again that day. But that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed once more. This time from an unknown number I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the screenshot folder and scrolled through them, one by one, until my breathing evened out. The next morning arrived with a steady drizzle. I dressed in a slate gray blouse, hair pulled back, heels low but firm. I didn't want to make a statement. I wanted to be the one who stood when everyone else sat down. The courthouse hallway was quiet. Pale green walls, long benches. Karen was already seated near the far end, her lawyer beside her. She looked up when I entered, but said nothing. Julia stood near the wall, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes entirely. A man with a press badge stepped forward. Ms. Monroe, he asked quietly, do you have anything you'd like to say before we go in? I looked past him, through the door that would open onto rows of polished seats, recorded testimony, and legal arguments. Then I met his gaze. Just this, I said. When someone tells you silence is love, they're usually trying to keep you from speaking. The courtroom doors opened with the kind of hush that follows a storm, not precedes one. A bailiff called our case, and I stepped forward with my attorney beside me, heart steady, breath deliberate. I wasn't trembling, not anymore. The nerves had burned off weeks ago. What was left now was clarity. Karen sat across the aisle, shifting in her seat. Her lawyer whispered something, but she wasn't listening. Julia remained standing near the edge of the room, hands clenched tight around a stack of papers. Lyle was there too, though he seemed more like a figure propped up than a participant. He avoided my gaze the entire time. The judge, an older woman, with hair pulled tightly into a bun and a voice that brooked no posturing, asked both sides to keep emotions out of their presentations. This isn't a reality show, she said bluntly. It's civil court. Facts, please. I let my lawyer do most of the talking. Contracts, transfers, recorded conversations. We submitted everything. When it was their turn, Julia's side attempted to argue emotional instability, to which the judge raised an eyebrow and asked for clinical documentation. None was provided. By the end of it, there were no slammed gavels, no dramatic gasps. The ruling was measured. Independent audits to be conducted. Jenny Monroe granted temporary legal authority over disputed funds, and all remaining property matters to be resolved through civil mediation. When it was over, Julia didn't speak. Karen stormed out. Lyle followed without looking back. I didn't smile. That wasn't what this was for. This wasn't about walking out victorious. This was about finally standing. 2 weeks passed before I returned to the Monroe house, what used to be home. I arrived unannounced, mid-afternoon, holding a manila folder with the final settlement papers and the release form removing my name from the deed. The front door wasn't locked. I walked through, my heels soft against the hardwood floors. The hallway smelled the same, lavender and furniture polish, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. I paused in the kitchen, ran my hand along the edge of the counter where I used to help bake pies for Thanksgiving. Passed by the staircase I once sat at during high school arguments. Stood at the doorway of my old bedroom and barely recognized the girl who used to cry into her pillow every time her mother told her, "You're just too much." Nothing had changed. Everything had. I placed the folder on the kitchen table. Then I pulled my old keys from my coat pocket, set them gently on top. I didn't knock. I didn't wait for anyone to find me. I just stepped out and let the door click shut behind me. A few days later, a plain white envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a personal check. The memo read, "Reimbursement for dress, venue, and emotional damages." The amount? $31,320, an exact match for what I'd tallied in one of my earliest spreadsheets. No note, no apology, just the check. I didn't cash it. I framed it. Underneath the glass, on a small brass plate, I had engraved, "Proof that they knew." It didn't make me whole, but it told me I hadn't imagined any of it. Another week passed before I heard from Marla again. Her name popped up on my screen during a quiet Friday morning at a cafe by the river. "I saw what you did," her message read. "If you ever need a partner for what's next, I'm in." I took a sip of my coffee, watching a pair of ducks skim across the surface of the water. My laptop was open, cursor blinking on a new document titled Monroe and Wells, Advocacy and Legal Planning for Women in Crisis. The idea had been brewing ever since the courthouse, because for every woman like me who found her way through the noise, there were 10 more still stuck inside it, wondering if they were the problem. I set my mug down, typed the first sentence of the mission statement, then stopped to read it back aloud. "Freedom isn't loud," I whispered. "Sometimes it's just the sound of no one calling you back." And that, more than any verdict or headline, was the ending I'd been waiting for. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones fought in courtrooms or over dinner tables. They're the ones where you finally choose yourself over being accepted. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that family isn't built on silence or submission. It's built on respect, accountability, and the freedom to speak your truth, even when it shakes the room. I didn't win by hurting them. I won by stepping away, by reclaiming the parts of me they tried to rewrite. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Closure doesn't always look like justice served in headlines. Sometimes it's just peace, and a quiet morning where no one's trying to control your life anymore. What about you? Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, only to realize you were sacrificing yourself in the process? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't sit right with you, let me know why. I'm here to listen. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and deeply human, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. You deserve to be heard. Let's keep the conversation going. Hi, my name's Callista. At my sister's birthday party, her big, glamorous, over-decorated event, she called me a useless servant. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Loud enough for the guests to laugh, and loud enough for me to finally hear it for what it really was. And that wasn't even the worst part. The truth? She'd already forged my signature, taken out a mortgage in my name, and claimed the house I'd paid for as her own. But why did I let it go on so long? Why didn't I speak up sooner? I guess when a family spends years treating you like furniture, you start believing you belong in the background. Until one day, you don't. What finally made me stop accepting it? And what did I do when I found out just how far she'd gone? You'll want to hear this. I arrived 2 hours early, just like I always did. The sun hadn't even begun to drop behind the tall pines that lined Marlene's backyard. I had a tray of lemon tarts in one hand, extra napkins in the other, and the same invisible badge I always wore when my family gathered: unpaid staff. Marlene didn't greet me at the door. She never did. She was in the middle of getting her hair curled by someone named Dahlia, who had over 200,000 followers on Instagram and called everyone babe. Her stylist was adjusting the drape of her champagne silk dress, and a photographer hovered nearby, capturing candid prep shots for the birthday post that would undoubtedly be scheduled down to the second. I slipped in through the side gate, went around to the back patio, and started unpacking platters onto the folding table I'd set up last night. Nobody noticed. Not even my mother, who was sipping her iced tea and listing Marlene's accomplishments to a neighbor from her church. She just got featured in that Charlotte Lifestyle magazine. Front page, no less, Mom said, voice bright and proud. And she's up for a regional branding award next month. I bent down to adjust the tablecloth. A familiar heat crawled up my neck. I'd heard that tone before, when Marlene was valedictorian, when she bought her first car, when she booked her first paid collab. Not once had she said, "Callista picked out the paint for this patio," or "Callista helped fix the water damage in the guest bathroom," or "Callista still pays half the taxes on this place because I couldn't qualify on my own." She never had to say it. No one would have listened anyway. As more guests arrived, I kept my head down. I made sure the drinks were cold, the cheese boards replenished, the decorative citronella candles were lit just enough to seem effortless, and when the time came to be introduced to someone new, a tall man with a Rolex and that slightly too white smile, I stepped forward, only to be cut off by Marlene's voice. "Oh, that's just my little helper, our full-time family servant, really." I blinked. The man chuckled awkwardly. I forced a smile. Something sour lodged in my throat, but I swallowed it like I always did. "She's joking," I muttered under my breath as I excused myself. Later that evening, the music softened and Marlene stood beneath the string lights, holding her rosé like she was about to toast the end of the world. Guests circled around her. Phones came out. Everyone leaned in. "I want to thank the incredible people who made this night possible," she said. "My glam team, my content manager, my chef for the stunning grazing table, and of course, my stylist, Dahlia." Applause. Whistles. Someone shouted, "Queen!" from the back. I stood beside the patio door, holding an empty platter, having just cleared away the untouched lemon tarts I made from scratch. I wasn't mentioned, not even a glance. And yet, I smiled, because that's what I did. One of Marlene's friends, Tiffany maybe, walked past and said, "You're amazing, girl. These servers could learn from you." I wanted to laugh, but it came out like a hiccup. I walked into the kitchen, peeled off my apron, and leaned against the counter. My legs ached, my face burned. On the dessert table, the cake I'd made, a red velvet layered with cream cheese frosting and sugared raspberries, sat untouched. They were cutting into a sheet cake with her face printed on it instead. I didn't even know she'd ordered another. "This isn't new," I murmured, placing the used forks in the sink. "You've always been the one in the shadows, the one who fills glasses, folds napkins, fixes things, and gets forgotten." My phone buzzed. A notification from a work client. I swiped it away. Then I saw it. An old flagged email from a real estate attorney. Subject line, Deed, Oak Ridge property. I'd never opened it. I hadn't wanted to stir things up back then. A guest walked in, glanced around, and looked at me. "Oh, good. You're the staff, right? Could you bring out more wine?" He smiled like he was being polite. I nodded, like I was being helpful. I didn't go for the wine. I went to the pantry. Inside, behind a stack of extra plates and a half-used citronella candle, I found the envelope. Beige. Faintly crumpled. Labeled in black marker, Deed, Oak Ridge property. I picked it up slowly, as if touching it too quickly would make it vanish. My hand trembled. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't something I imagined. I whispered, barely able to hear myself over the music from outside. "This isn't her house. It's mine." I slipped the envelope into my purse, tucking it behind my wallet like it was something shameful, like I was hiding a secret I hadn't even told myself. Outside the pantry, the sound of laughter drifted in waves, light and careless. As I stepped back into the crowd, the lights from the patio strung across the trees seemed too bright, too rehearsed. The air felt different, heavier. I was halfway to the dessert table when I saw him. Bryce Langford. I stopped so abruptly, someone behind me bumped into my shoulder. I murmured a quick apology, but my eyes never left him. He was standing near the edge of the yard, chatting with a group of people I didn't recognize. Tall, pressed shirt. The same quiet smile I remembered, except now it had lines around the edges. He'd aged, but not in a way that made him look tired. He looked successful. Before I could process why he was even here, Marlene spotted him. "Oh my God, Bryce! You came!" She squealed, her voice too loud for the space. Heads turned. She weaved through the guests with a practiced glide and wrapped him in a hug that lasted a few seconds too long. Then she turned to the crowd like she was presenting a prize. "Everyone, this is Bryce, my brilliant college buddy, and, well, Callista's ex-fiancé," she added with a coy grin. The sting was immediate, like salt in a paper cut. A few people chuckled, someone gasped. I didn't move, just nodded politely and kept walking toward the drink table. And then, right on cue, she added, "She's still organizing birthday parties, huh?" My spine tightened, but I didn't react. Not visibly. I grabbed a glass of lemonade I didn't want, took a sip, and set it down untouched. I heard Bryce say my name, softly, cautiously, but I walked away. I wasn't ready to see that look in his eyes. The one that said, "I thought you'd be somewhere else by now." Back inside the kitchen, I pulled the envelope from my purse. I unfolded the deed and scanned the text again, even though I already knew what it said. Oak Ridge property, sole ownership, Callista Ray. 3 years ago. 3 years I let Marlene live here, film here, throw parties here, while I paid for termite treatments and window replacements and water bills she never opened. I remembered Dad handing me the papers before he passed. "I want you to have something of your own," he'd said, squeezing my hand. Back then, it felt too big. I wasn't ready to step out of the role they'd carved for me. It was easier to let Marlene play the part of the host, the face, the one everyone saw. I whispered, 3 years, and not once has she thanked me. The sound of my voice startled me. I rarely said anything out loud anymore, unless someone needed me to. I heard the patio door creak. Footsteps. I turned and saw Bryce in the doorway. "Hey," he said, voice gentle. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just nodded and stepped aside so he could come in. He leaned against the counter across from me, not too close. He looked uncomfortable, like someone realizing they might have misunderstood something for a very long time. "Marlene told me you were comfortable staying at home," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable," I repeated. "That's one word for unpaid labor." He gave a dry chuckle, then ran a hand through his hair. "She made it sound like you didn't want more, like you were just content where you were. She also said she was allergic to dairy for 6 years just to get out of cooking for Mom. You believe everything she says?" He looked away, embarrassed. I continued. I built this party, I gave her this house, and she tells people I'm the maid. His eyes met mine. This time, he didn't look away. If I'd known, he started. But you didn't, I cut in, because you never asked. You just assumed. That's what people like you do. You see someone quiet and think that means they've got nothing to say. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left for him to say. We stood there for a moment, the silence filling every inch of the space between us. He shifted, like he might apologize again, but I turned away and began refolding the deed. I didn't need his pity. I didn't need his guilt. Outside, someone began singing Happy Birthday. The crowd joined in. Marlene's voice carried loudest, harmonizing like it was a performance. I looked out the window at all the people smiling, clapping, recording every second. Everyone out there thinks I'm lucky to be tolerated, I murmured, but they're all standing on my foundation. I slid the deed back into my purse, zipped it shut, and straightened up. No more pretending. The singing died down, replaced by the clink of glasses and the buzz of people trying to talk over one another. I stepped out of the kitchen just as someone began ushering the family toward the backyard for a group toast. I followed, not because I wanted to be part of it, but because if I didn't show up, someone would say I was being dramatic. Marlene stood at the center, a glass of something pink in her hand. The string lights caught her perfectly curled hair, and she smiled like she was living inside her own commercial. To family, she began, raising her glass, and to knowing your place in it. Some people laughed right away. A few glanced around like they weren't sure if it was meant to be a joke. My mother chuckled. A man I didn't recognize nudged me gently and whispered, "She's always been the helper, huh? Never complains." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my mouth not to betray me. I slipped away from the crowd, my heels clicking on the wooden floor of the hallway as I passed framed photos. Marlene's graduation, Marlene's bridal shower, Marlene with the mayor at a charity brunch. I opened the guest room door and walked inside. It was quieter here. Dim. The only light came from a small lamp on the dresser where the family memory wall stood like a shrine. I scanned the frames. Same faces, same smiles. And then I saw it. The birthday photo from when Marlene turned 11. I hadn't thought about that day in decades, but the image brought it all back. I'd worn a floral dress Mom pulled from a box in the attic. It didn't fit right. I'd brushed my hair down because Marlene said braids made me look too country. I had helped decorate the porch with balloons that popped before noon. And then, when it was time to take the group photo, Mom had turned to me and said, "This one's just for Marlene's friends, sweetheart. You'll understand." I didn't argue. I just stepped aside. Looking at that picture now, I realized she was right. I did understand. Even back then, I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Not for nostalgia, just as a reminder of what being invisible actually looked like. I left the room and walked to the kitchen. The voices outside were muffled, giving me a moment to breathe. I opened the cabinet beneath the microwave, half expecting to find a mess of old extension cords. Instead, I found my laptop. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust layered the keys, and the charging cable was curled like an afterthought. I plugged it in, more out of muscle memory than hope, and waited for the screen to flicker. When it finally came to life, it opened to a folder labeled Senior Portfolio. My name sat on each draft. The thumbnails showed designs I had poured myself into. Layouts, product mock-ups, branding ideas. One project had been inspired by a textile pattern from my grandmother's old quilts. Another borrowed colors from the wild hydrangeas that lined our street. I hadn't opened this folder since the week I turned down the scholarship to Colorado. Senior year, full ride, a place to go and make something of myself. But then Marlene had shown up, baby in tow, crying in the kitchen while Mom hovered around her like a nurse in a hospital drama. No job, no husband, just excuses and, how could this happen? Looks passed between them, like I wasn't even in the room. Mom had pulled me aside 2 days later. "You're the calm one," she said. "You'll understand. We need you here. What she meant was, you're the one we can guilt without pushback. So I gave up the scholarship. I told myself I'd reapply later, after the baby started school, after things settled. But things never settle in this family. They just reshape themselves around the people who scream the loudest. I opened one of the design files. It took a moment to load, but there it was. Clean, sharp, with notes I barely recognized as my own handwriting. The door creaked behind me, but I didn't turn around. Whoever it was, they could wait. I stared at the screen. My screen. And I whispered. It could have been me. But I stayed. I didn't cry. There was no need for tears. Not anymore. I closed the laptop lid and leaned back, hands folded in my lap. A long, steady breath left me like it had been waiting to exhale for years. I stood there, phone in hand, thumb hovering over send. A quiet came over me, not the kind that leaves you alone, but the kind that demands you listen. I didn't send the email, not yet. I closed the screen, slipped the phone into my bag, and walked back toward the patio. One step at a time. My head felt clearer than it had in years, like a fog was finally lifting. By the time I returned, the formal toast was already underway. They'd rearranged the seating into a long table setup, string lights overhead and glassware shimmering like everything was perfectly in place. Because that's what Marlene knew how to do. Make things look good from a distance. Place cards sat neatly on every setting. I scanned the line, walking slowly, not because I was unsure of where to sit, but because I wanted to see. There it was. Third seat from the right, beside my cousin Cheryl, was a name tag that should have read Callista. It didn't. Instead, it said Cheryl M. Mine had been replaced. I paused, fingertips brushing the edge of the card. She hadn't forgotten. She'd chosen not to include me. The servers were seated at the folding table near the fence, eating small plates with one another in the dim evening light. They had a seat. I didn't. I stepped back from the table and moved toward the hedge line, staying just close enough to hear the toast. To family, Marlene called, lifting her glass. And to knowing your place in it. A few people chuckled. A few looked confused. My mother raised her glass without hesitation. Someone patted my arm as they walked by and said, "You always know how to make things work. You've got a gift." I nodded, even though I wanted to scream. I stood alone for most of it, watching them clink glasses, kiss cheeks, pass around compliments like they were mints. Even the kids got more acknowledgement than I had. It wasn't until Bryce walked over that anyone noticed I was missing. "You didn't get a seat?" he asked quietly, scanning the table behind me. I gave him a small smile, flat, without warmth. "Not tonight, not most nights." He opened his mouth, as if about to explain something that didn't need explaining, then closed it again. "I didn't know. About the house, about the bills, about you turning down school." I met his eyes, calm. "You didn't ask. You never asked. You just took Marlene's word for it." He looked down. "I thought you were content. I figured you wanted this kind of life." I tilted my head. "You figured wrong, but you're not the only one." He looked like he wanted to apologize again, but I didn't give him the chance. "We all would have made different choices if we'd known better," I said. "Hindsight's easy. Living with the consequences is the real work." That shut him up. I left him standing there and walked inside, my footsteps lighter than they had any right to be. I wasn't carrying guilt anymore. I'd set it down. The kitchen was quieter now. Most of the caterers were outside cleaning up, and the smell of heated trays and melted butter still hung in the air. I found my mother near the sink, inspecting the coffee carafes. She was fussing over the labels like they were going to be reviewed in a magazine spread. I cleared my throat softly. "Why didn't I have a seat?" I asked. She didn't even look at me. "Don't start. Not tonight." "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I'm asking a question." She sighed, as if the weight of my presence was somehow heavier than the years I'd spent keeping her house intact. "This isn't about you," she snapped. "This is your sister's night. You always find a way to make it about yourself." That was it. "That's rich," I said. "Considering I gave her the house this party's being held in. Considering I've paid the taxes, paid the repairs, and made sure you never missed a prescription." She finally looked up, but not with remorse, just irritation. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done being silent." She looked away again, waving me off with a flick of her hand. "It's always been Marlene. You were always different. You never needed the attention." I studied her face, trying to find the version of her I'd once run to for comfort, but she wasn't there. Maybe she never had been. "It's never been my day, has it?" I asked. She didn't answer. She turned her back and started rinsing out the coffee pot. I caught my reflection in the cabinet door. My arms still held tension. My eyes looked tired, but something in my stance had changed. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't shrinking anymore. Outside, the party was winding down. The music softened into something instrumental, unmemorable. The lighting dimmed a little. People started to check their watches, gather their purses. I stepped out for air, letting the breeze brush against my face as I leaned against the porch railing. I noticed Bryce watching me from across the yard. He didn't approach this time. Maybe he'd finally realized that not every silence was an invitation. I pulled out my phone, opened the draft to the property lawyer, and hovered over the button. This time, I didn't hesitate. After sending the message, I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the screen, stood up from the porch railing, and walked inside. Past the folding chairs being stacked, past the catering trays going cold, past my sister's laughter echoing through the speakers like nothing had happened. But something had. I had changed, and they hadn't noticed yet. I made my way upstairs. The hallway to my childhood bedroom still creaked the same way it did when I was 13, sneaking back from midnight kitchen raids. I hadn't stepped into that room since the day Dad's things were boxed up. When I opened the door, the scent hit me first. Old cedar, dried lavender, and the faint smell of printer ink. The walls hadn't changed. The posters were gone, but the outlines where they once hung were still faintly visible. The desk in the corner still held a chipped corner I'd covered with a sticker that read, "Let her speak." I crossed the room and pulled open the bottom drawer. The envelope was there, exactly where he'd left it. "Callista, open this if you ever feel like you've been erased." His handwriting was unmistakable, strong, slanted slightly to the left. I sat down on the edge of the bed and tore the flap open. Inside was a letter and a notarized property transfer. It was dated a few months before Dad died. Everything was official, documented, clear. The Oak Ridge house was mine. Signed over not because I asked, but because he saw something no one else had cared to see. "I know you won't ask for it," the letter read, "but you've carried this family without credit. You deserve something that's yours." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I folded the letter, slipped it into my purse beside the deed, and stood up straighter than I had in years. I wasn't hiding this time, not from them, not from myself. Downstairs, the party had picked up again. Marlene's voice filtered through the air like bad perfume. Loud, lingering, and hard to ignore. I took the long route back to the patio, walking past the side garden, behind the shrubs where the projection equipment was set up for the big finale. The DJ's voice came over the speakers. "All right, folks, we've got a special video tribute for the birthday girl. Sit tight, this one's a tearjerker." Guests gathered near the screen. Marlene sat in the front row, hands folded delicately in her lap, like she was about to accept an award. I stayed behind, near the hedge, out of view. The screen flickered. Instead of the polished tribute her assistant had curated, another video began to play. I knew it well. I'd received it anonymously weeks ago. No subject line, just a link. A friend of Marlene's, maybe former friend now, had sent it. It had been filmed on a phone, audio grainy but clear. Marlene's voice filled the air. "I don't need Callista to be seen. She's just background, you know? Some people were made to be the help. Gasps, real, audible ones. She appeared on screen, pacing in her dressing room, still in her robe, hair half done. Honestly, if she disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice. Especially not Mom. Silence. As if someone had sucked all the air out of the garden. I stepped forward, just enough to be visible. Marlene turned, her face pale under the patio lights. For once, she didn't have a comeback ready. "That was taken out of context," she stammered. I tilted my head, keeping my voice steady. "Out of context? Should I play the rest?" She stared at me like I had betrayed her. That was the irony of it. She truly believed she was the one betrayed. "You think you're better than me now?" she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "I've always been better than the version of me you told people about." The crowd didn't move. Some shifted awkwardly. One of the aunts who never liked me nodded slowly, like she'd just realized she'd been clapping for the wrong daughter all this time. Marlene stood up, smoothing her dress like it could help her recover control. "You're trying to humiliate me. That's what this is." "I'm not trying," I replied. "You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it." She blinked. A second later, she stormed off the patio, heels clacking down the steps and out of sight. No one followed her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I walked over to the table where the projector stood and picked up my bag. Then, with one final glance toward the house I'd been written out of too many times, I texted Avery. "Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Let's move forward." The message delivered. Then marked read. Grant was still in the doorway when I sent the message. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. His eyes followed me as I stepped past him and walked back toward the yard, where the guests were lingering, unsure of what to do with themselves now that Marlene had vanished, and the party's perfect surface had cracked in front of them. Some tried to act casual, hovering near the dessert table or refilling their drinks, but most just kept glancing toward me, waiting, maybe, to see what I'd do next. I didn't make them wait long. Marlene's voice came from the far end of the yard, too loud, too cheerful. "All right, folks, time for cake. Let's not let one little hiccup ruin the mood." I walked to the center of the patio, right where she'd stood earlier to give her toast. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This party is over," I said, calm, steady, unapologetic. "And I suggest you all leave, unless you've come to thank the actual host." It took a second for the meaning to register. A murmur rippled through the guests. A woman near the drink station whispered, "Wait, this is her house?" Someone else responded, "Are you serious? I thought it was Marlene's." I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. I stood with my arms crossed as the silence grew thick. Marlene froze mid-sentence, cupcake in hand, halfway toward her daughter. Her mouth tightened. "She's being dramatic. Don't mind her." But it was already too late. Guests began gathering their bags, saying awkward goodbyes. Some didn't even make eye contact. Within minutes, the once-packed yard had emptied into quiet rustles of footsteps, muted car engines, and the occasional nervous laugh as people retreated. I didn't enjoy it, but I did feel relief. Back inside, I walked past the photo wall and into the guest room, where I'd set up the backup projection system earlier in the day. I plugged in the second flash drive. The file loaded quickly. On screen appeared Marlene, caught by a phone camera in her prep room the day before the party. She held the clay sculpture I'd made for the centerpiece, delicate, hand-painted with floral patterns from our grandmother's old china. "She's not getting credit for this," Marlene muttered in the video, adjusting her robe and glancing toward the mirror. "It's my moment." And then, without hesitation, she let it fall. The crash of ceramic echoed in the clip, followed by her laugh, sharp, proud, like she'd just won a game no one else knew they were playing. I let the footage play, even though the room was empty. I wasn't doing it for witnesses anymore. I was doing it because I needed to see it again. To remind myself this wasn't in my head. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't creating drama. I turned off the projector and shut down the system. Then I walked to the kitchen. Grant sat at the island, shoulders slightly hunched, a glass of untouched water in front of him. He didn't look up as I approached, but he didn't move away either. I placed the manila folder on the counter between us. "This is a mortgage agreement," I said. $180,000. Taken out using my name, signed with a forgery. He looked up then, his expression slow to shift, from confusion to understanding to disbelief. "I stayed quiet about this," I continued, "because I didn't want to make things worse, because I thought, maybe, if I just kept doing the right thing, they'd eventually see it." He nodded once, barely perceptible. "But they didn't," I said, "and now there will be consequences." Behind us, footsteps. Marlene re-entered the kitchen, arms folded, face already twisted in preemptive denial. "You're bluffing," she snapped. "There's no way I could have." I turned toward her. "Then sue me." It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely stunned. Not offended, not defensive, just quiet. She glanced toward Grant, but he didn't meet her eyes. "I didn't do anything illegal," she said, but her voice was weaker now, uncertain. "We're family. Families borrow. That's what people do." I opened my bag again, pulled out one more folder, and handed it to Grant. "If you care about your daughter, you'll want to know exactly what her mother's willing to risk behind closed doors." He took it. His hands shook. Marlene stared at me, her jaw tight. "This is about revenge." "No," I said. "This is about truth. You can lie to everyone else. But I'm done lying to myself." For a long moment, none of us moved. The kitchen, once filled with the aroma of catered food and quiet judgments, now felt colder, honest. I turned and walked away, not waiting for her to answer. The house felt different the next morning, quieter, more hollow, like the echoes inside it were finally catching up to the years of things left unsaid. I parked down the block, walked up the front steps with my hair still wet from the shower and no makeup on. I wasn't there to impress anyone. Avery's office sat in a brick building just off Main Street. No gold-plated signs, no unnecessary posturing, just clean lines, firm handshakes, and facts. She was waiting for me inside, seated behind her desk, her sleeves rolled up and a legal pad already halfway full. She didn't ask me how I was. I appreciated that. She slid a folder across the table. We verified the documents. The signature was lifted from an old tax form, matched against your past filings. The loan was filed using that forgery. I didn't blink. "So it's clear?" "As daylight," she said. "This isn't just a moral failure. It's fraud, state and federal." My fingers tapped the edge of the folder once, then stilled. "If this goes to court," she added, "she's not just looking at a lost house. Depending on how she responds to discovery, it could escalate." I met her eyes. "I don't want a circus." Avery nodded. "Then we move quickly. Filing begins today." Outside her office, I stood on the sidewalk and let the sun warm my shoulders. The breeze had a bite to it. Fall was coming. I checked my phone. No new messages from Marlene. Not that I expected one. That evening, I returned to the house, not to argue, not to fight, but to gather the rest of my things. I'd left behind boxes of files, a few personal belongings, and my father's old journals. When I stepped inside, the place looked untouched, staged, a home where nothing had ever been wrong. But sitting in the front room was Dr. Lucien Baer. His cane rested against his knee, and a cup of tea steamed on the side table. Edwina sat across from him, her hands folded tightly like she was praying he'd fix something. "Callista," Lucien said, standing with effort. "I heard what happened. I came because, well, some things need to be said out loud." I nodded slowly, unsure of what he meant. Edwina barely looked at me. "He doesn't need to get involved." "She's still your daughter," Lucien said to her, then turned to me. "I've watched this family from a distance for years, sat at your holiday tables, donated to your fundraisers, showed up to birthday parties with gifts I picked carefully for people who barely looked up." He took a slow sip of tea before continuing. But I never once saw you, Callista. Treated as though you belonged. I didn't say anything. I let the weight of his words land in the room. You raised this household. You kept the roof standing, literally and figuratively, and all you got in return was silence. The silence between your mother's praises for Marlene. The silence in family photos where your seat was always just out of frame. Edwina shifted, the tightness in her face trembling for a second. You don't know the full story. I know enough, he said gently, and so does she. I looked at my mother. She stared at the floor. Lucian touched my arm. If you choose to fight, do it with the knowledge that your life has always mattered, even if this house never told you that. I nodded once, throat tight. Later that night, after Lucian had gone, a courier arrived with a cream envelope and a familiar return address. Avery Quist. Grant answered the door, took the delivery, and read the front before handing it to Marlene. "What's this?" she asked, already annoyed. "Summons," he said. She tore it open, skimmed the first paragraph, then the second. Her breath hitched. "This is insane. She's suing me?" "She's pressing for civil penalties and asset recovery," he said evenly. "You forged her name." Her hands shook. "I didn't forge anything. I mean, look, it was just paperwork. It wasn't like I stole from a stranger." "That's exactly what makes it worse," Grant replied. "You stole from your sister." Marlene's voice cracked. "I gave her something to do. I gave her a life. What was she going to be without me? Some sad, dusty sidekick with a Pinterest board and no audience?" He didn't respond. In the hallway, their daughter Sienna peeked from behind the door. Her eyes wide, her mouth tight. She'd heard enough to know something was unraveling. Marlene saw her, and for a second, her defiance wavered. She looked in the mirror hanging beside the coat rack and paused, just long enough to register what was staring back at her. Not a victim, not a star, just a woman who'd finally lost the script. The next morning, I checked my email. There it was. Avery's message. Her team offered mediation. They want to avoid public filings. I replied instantly, only if she admits it, in writing, in public. Then I closed the laptop and sat back, because some truths don't need revenge. They just need light. The email was sent. No hesitation this time, no shaky fingers. I closed the laptop and set it aside, knowing exactly what that message meant. Avery would move swiftly, and Marlene's team, if they had any common sense, would stop pretending this was a misunderstanding and start treating it like the legal crisis it was. A few hours later, the sky was shifting into dusk. I stood at the kitchen sink in my own apartment, rinsing a mug that had once belonged to Dad. On the rim, a tiny chip where he used to rest his thumb. I hadn't noticed it until the day we packed his things. Funny what you start seeing when people stop talking. My phone buzzed. I dried my hands and picked it up. Avery. They're asking for mediation. Press wants a statement. We move when you're ready. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stepped onto my small balcony and watched a few teenagers play basketball in the park across the street. One kid missed a shot and laughed at himself. No drama, no scene. Just an honest moment of being human. Back inside, I typed out a reply. Only if she admits it. In writing, in public. Then I sent it. The next morning, I was scheduled for a video call with Avery and a few members of Marlene's legal team. But first, I had something else to do. The community center downtown wasn't glamorous. Beige walls, flickering overhead lights, chairs that creaked when you shifted your weight. But it held something far more valuable. Accountability. I arrived just before 9. The place was mostly empty, save for a few early risers and a receptionist sipping coffee from a World's Okayest employee mug. I gave her my name, and she waved me toward room 3. Inside, a panel had been set up. 3 mediators, neutral but attentive, and one small video screen where Marlene would join remotely. She hadn't dared to show up in person. Avery was already there, seated beside me, folders neatly stacked, posture unflinching. I sat straighter just because she did. The screen came to life. Marlene's face appeared. Hair pulled back too tightly, makeup layered just enough to look natural. She wore white. Of course she did. I almost laughed. "Ms. Dorr," one of the mediators began, "we're here to facilitate a resolution between you and Ms. Ray. Let's begin with your statement." Marlene cleared her throat. "First of all, I never intended for things to get this far. This was a family matter, private, and I don't think legal action was ever necessary." Avery leaned forward. "The forgery was necessary?" Marlene flushed. "It wasn't forgery. It was expediency. Callista wasn't using the house. She said—" "I never said that," I interrupted. Calm, clear. "And if this isn't a real apology, we're done." There was a long pause. The mediator looked toward Marlene. "Ms. Dorr, would you like to revise your statement?" Marlene's jaw twitched. "I, Marlene Dorr," she began reluctantly, "acknowledge that I used my sister's name without consent to secure a mortgage loan. I misrepresented her involvement, and in doing so, I overstepped both legal and ethical boundaries. It wasn't warm, it wasn't heartfelt, but it was public, it was recorded. I didn't need more. The mediators moved to the settlement terms. I signed my end, then closed the file. It was done. As Avery and I walked out, she looked at me. "How do you feel?" Like I just turned off a noise that's been running in the background for 15 years. That night, I returned to the house one last time. Not for confrontation, just closure. I parked in front, knocked, and waited. It was Grant who answered. "She's not here," he said. "I'm not here for her." He opened the door and let me in. The place felt smaller than I remembered, quieter. I walked past the living room, past the hallway full of photos I wasn't in, and into the back office, once Dad's, now mostly empty. On the desk was a shoebox labeled "For Callista," in Grant's handwriting. Inside were old receipts, a flash drive, and a note. "I should have spoken up sooner, but I see you now, and so does Sienna." I folded the note and tucked it into my purse. As I was about to leave, Sienna came down the stairs, holding a school project. "Is it true?" she asked. I looked at her, that same hesitation in her eyes I'd seen in the mirror for years. "It's true," I said gently, "but it's over now." She nodded slowly, then hugged me without another word. The moment I stepped outside, the wind picked up, sending dried leaves skittering across the porch. I stood there for a minute. Then I opened my phone, navigated to the Department of State licensing website, and resumed the application I'd left unfinished a decade ago. The cursor blinked at me. I clicked Submit. Because this time, I wasn't building for anyone else. The submission confirmation hit my inbox around 9:07 a.m., just as I was pouring coffee into the same ceramic mug I'd used for years, the one with a small chip on the handle and a fading bluebird near the rim. I didn't smile. Not exactly, but something softened in me, like an old knot loosening in my chest. By noon, the first headlines began to trickle in. Local influencer sued by sister for mortgage fraud. I was erased. Callista Ray speaks out. Sister versus sister, when branding goes too far. I wasn't refreshing news pages. I wasn't scrolling for comments. But I was aware of them. You can feel it when your name becomes public property. Except this time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. By late afternoon, Marlene's PR firm released a statement. It was brief, careful, designed to pacify. Ms. Dorr regrets any misunderstandings and has taken steps to address family matters privately. No apology, no accountability, just damage control. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But then, a friend forwarded me a screenshot. A major sponsor, one of Marlene's biggest, had dropped her. "We believe in ethical partnerships. Trust matters." It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. That evening, Avery called. "They've settled. Full retraction. Public apology pending. You'll receive the draft before it goes live." I thanked her, then set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me hadn't allowed for this outcome. Somewhere between the trauma and the routines I built around it, I stopped imagining justice could be quiet. But it can be. That night, I sat down with a copy of the local print paper, just to hold the ink in my hands. The front page didn't carry the story, but page 7 did. And there it was. A pull quote in bold. "I gave her the house. She gave me erasure." Callista Ray. I read it once, then folded the page, not out of pride, but preservation. Sienna had her first school debate that week. I showed up early, sat in the third row, and watched her speak with a poise that made me ache. When she caught sight of me, she didn't smile right away. Instead, she gave me a nod. Subtle, but full of something that felt like understanding. Afterward, in the hallway, she walked beside me in silence until we reached the exit. "My teacher asked what inspires me," she said softly. "I said you." I didn't know how to answer, so I squeezed her hand. Later that week, I stopped by the old house, not for confrontation, not even for closure, just to see. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown. A for sale sign leaned slightly to one side. I walked up to the porch, paused in front of the door where I used to hang seasonal wreaths, and set down a small package. Inside, a copy of the deed. A note. "You once told me I didn't know my place. Turns out I do. It just isn't here." Back at my apartment, I hung a new nameplate outside my studio door. Ray & Co. Creative design. No pretense. No borrowed names. No more giving my voice away. I spent the next few days organizing, setting up consultations, calling old contacts from school who still remembered my senior project. One even said, "It's about time." When the apology from Marlene finally went live, I didn't watch the video. I didn't need to hear her voice tremble through scripted regret. I skimmed the transcript just once. It ended with, "To my sister, I am sorry. I took what wasn't mine, and I let silence do the rest." I closed the tab. The mail arrived that afternoon. Among it, a small envelope from Lucian Bear. No return address, just my name in strong cursive. Inside, a photograph. Me, age 16, crouched near a folding table at a backyard party, adjusting a tablecloth while Marlene posed near a cake. I didn't know anyone had taken it. Tucked behind the photo was a torn scrap of yellowed paper. My father's handwriting, unmistakable. "You never needed the spotlight, but that doesn't mean you didn't earn it." I held the photo for a long time, not to mourn it, just to own it. Later that night, I stood on my own porch, tea in hand, cool air brushing past my shoulders. A car slowed at the curb. Marlene's. She didn't get out. She didn't wave. I didn't either. Because some stories don't end with reunion. Some end with someone walking away. Quietly, finally, into something they built for themselves. Hi there. My name's Carolyn, and for 15 years, I mopped the floors at a company my sister claimed to build. She smiled on magazine covers while I cleaned her office at night. She called me just the janitor, said I belonged in the background. But what she didn't know was that I owned the company. The documents were signed. My father's legacy was mine. Still, they erased me, cropped me out of photos, misspelled my name on slideshows, called me a risk behind closed doors. And the worst part? It wasn't just Darlene. It was my own mother saying, "Let her feel useful. It keeps her occupied." So I stayed quiet. Until the day her badge stopped working and mine opened every door. How does someone survive 15 years of silence, then flip the entire boardroom without ever raising her voice? Do you really want to know? I arrived just in time to see the second wine bottle opened. The room smelled like garlic bread and ambition. Everyone talking louder than they needed to. The lights in the banquet hall were too warm, casting a golden hue that made everyone look happier than they really were. I stood at the edge of the carpet, still in my plain gray slacks and navy blouse. My hair was pulled back into the same bun I wore every day. Nobody turned their head, not even my mother. Darlene, in her burgundy blazer and sculpted heels, was already in full performance mode, laughing too loud, patting the shoulder of one of Dad's old colleagues, taking selfies with her wine glass tilted just right. I heard her say, "Well, this is what 20 years of brand management looks like." Her voice echoed. My mother glanced in my direction, but didn't smile, didn't nod, just turned back to the circle she was seated in. Someone muttered, "Oh, you're here," before shifting their chair to face a story about Darlene's new podcast interview. I didn't say anything. I found a seat at the far end, near the staff entrance. The linen on the table hadn't even been pressed. A butter knife rested uneven on a chipped plate. I smoothed the napkin and folded it onto my lap. My hands smelled faintly of bleach. I'd come straight from work. Dinner began. Plates were passed down, dishes filled with chicken marsala and overcooked vegetables. I served myself quietly, nodding at the waiter as he placed a glass of water in front of me. Darlene's laugh cut through the music like it always had. Sharp, knowing, confident. Midway through the main course, someone raised their glass. "To Darlene," they said, "for making the cover of Women to Watch Midwest." Applause erupted. The man seated beside me clapped, then leaned toward me and asked, "You two are sisters, right?" I nodded once. "Oh, wow. You look different." He smiled like it was a compliment. Darlene beamed from her seat, waving her hand playfully. "Let's be real. One of us scrubs floors, the other gets published. Balance, right?" People laughed. Real, full-throated laughter. Someone nearby even whistled. The camera panned across the room. Some intern with a tripod capturing candids for the company blog. The lens swept past me. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just stared down at the ice cubes in my glass, watching one crack slowly as it melted. Across the table, my mother chuckled. She touched Darlene's arm and whispered something into her ear. They both laughed again, louder this time. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't speak. I'd learned years ago that my silence made them more uncomfortable than my voice ever could. After the dessert plates were cleared, a woman dropped her napkin near my feet. I bent down to pick it up. "You're fast," she said, joking. "Ever think of coming to my place to clean?" More laughter. I smiled without showing teeth and stood back up. I needed air. I walked out into the hallway, passing the mirrored wall next to the coat check. My reflection caught me mid-step. I didn't look tired. I didn't look angry. I just looked hollow, like someone standing in a life that didn't quite fit. Inside the restroom, I locked the stall door and pulled out my phone. I opened the legal folder I kept tucked away in my photo gallery. The first image was a scanned document. Power of attorney, 52% shareholding. My name, notarized, signed by my late father. The next image, my ID card from work. Custodial team, Carolyn M. I stared at those two images for a long time. Side by side, they told the story nobody else would believe if I said it out loud. I whispered, "Not yet." Back at the banquet room, the music had switched to something upbeat. Darlene was twirling her wine glass, still talking, still performing. I stood at the doorway for a moment, then turned around and left. They wouldn't remember I was there, but I would. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I took the long way, circling downtown in my beat-up sedan, windows down, letting the cold air sting my face. The music in the background was soft, some old country station barely coming through, but it helped me stay grounded. By the time I got back to my apartment, my hands were stiff from the steering wheel, but my mind had settled. I didn't sleep much, just a few hours, enough to keep me standing. Morning came like it always did, gray and quiet. I packed my lunch, pulled on my work polo, and made the short drive to Northstone headquarters. As I stepped through the side entrance reserved for facilities staff, the smell of floor wax and coffee hit me. Familiar, comforting in a way, but that comfort cracked the second I walked past the lobby. There it was, a 6-foot-wide vinyl print mounted across the main wall. The Cray family legacy, a century of excellence. A photo collage wrapped around the headline. Board members, grandparents, uncles, Darlene in at least 4 different outfits, cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. Even Mom in that powder blue suit she saves for important functions. And then there was the picture. I knew it well. It was from a summer family picnic 5 years ago. I was standing on the left, holding a tray of burgers, smiling. The photo they used was nearly identical, but I wasn't in it. Cropped clean out, like I'd never stood there. It wasn't sloppy. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. The light was balanced, edges softened. No sign of tampering to the average eye, but I knew. I stared for a few moments, my cleaning cart idle behind me. People walked past, offering polite nods or pretending not to see me at all. "Nice job on the floors last night," someone said offhandedly. I couldn't even tell who it was. I nodded, pushed my cart forward, and didn't say a word. Around mid-morning, I was reassigned to prep the media room for an upcoming family appreciation event. A couple of interns buzzed around, fixing lighting and testing audio. Darlene's assistant, Monica, stood in front of the projector, organizing files on her laptop. I swept quietly around the perimeter until Monica left the laptop unattended to answer a call. I leaned in, just enough to see the screen. Slide number 4. Our family support, behind every success. There they were, a slideshow of smiling relatives. Darlene, of course. Mom, again. 3 cousins. Even Uncle Carl, who lives in Arizona. Then there was mine. My name was misspelled, Carlin instead of Carolyn. And next to it, support staff, facilities. The photo? A blurry shot from an office birthday where I was handing out paper plates. I looked like someone who had stumbled into the frame. Monica returned just as I stepped back. She glanced at me, then at the screen. "Oh, that's just an old draft," she said, waving a hand. "We didn't mean anything by it." She didn't move to fix it. I gave her a small nod, picked up my mop, and stepped out of the room. Back in the janitor's closet, I sat on the overturned bucket for a minute, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera. Click. Slide number 4 was now saved. I knew better than to make a scene. I had seen what happened to people who spoke too soon, especially women like me. Quiet, polite, predictable. Instead, I kept my head down the rest of the shift. I smiled when spoken to, logged my hours, went through the motions. But after lunch, when the building cleared out for the day's off-site event, I slipped into the records room with a vacuum in hand. The custodian access still worked on that door. The room smelled like paper and dust. I moved quickly, scrolling through digital logs and printed press releases. I looked for photos, staff acknowledgments, historical newsletters. I found 22 published company newsletters dating back 5 years. My name appeared in only one, and only because I had been listed as a contact in the emergency response drill. I had been at every company picnic, cleaned every after-hours board meeting, worked through 2 Christmas Eves and 1 New Year's Day. And yet, in these documents, I barely existed. One photo caught my eye, the team photo from the year Darlene won her first PR award. I remembered standing beside Miguel, smiling. He had his arm around my shoulder. But in the final version on file, I wasn't there. Miguel was. The background was identical, but the space I had occupied was filled with a tree. A literal tree. I copied the files onto a USB drive I kept in my sock. On my way out, I wiped the keyboard, erased my access trail, and shut off the lights. Back at my locker, I pulled out a folded notebook labeled Archive Notes. I wrote down the day, time, file name, and folder path. Then I labeled the entry, Image replaced, Photo, Team Award 2018. I didn't feel numb, not anymore. I felt alert. Later that night, after I locked up the janitor's closet and returned home, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the TV. The apartment was silent, except for the gentle hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from the radiator. I made tea, sat on the edge of the bed, still in my work pants, and opened my laptop. I scrolled through old messages, ones I hadn't read in years. Most were one-liners, quick, dismissive replies, a digital trail of things never followed up on. I found the text thread with Darlene from 2 years ago when I'd asked if she could help me update my profile on the company intranet. Her response had been short. "I'm busy. No one cares about janitor bios. No follow-up, no emoji, just silence." I highlighted her message in red and added a small tag next to it. Visibility request denied. I wasn't collecting these things for pity. I was tracking a pattern, not just in Darlene, but in the way the whole system around her operated. Some people got platforms, others got cut out. By the weekend, I thought I had gotten used to the feeling. The ache that settles when you've been overlooked too many times to count. But it hit me all over again at Sunday lunch. The invitation had come through a group text. Darlene had insisted on a family meal to celebrate our shared legacy. I knew better than to expect sincerity. Still, I showed up, wearing a sweater that I hoped didn't smell like bleach and slacks, without too many visible creases. Mom's house looked the same. Modest, neat, front porch, potted with begonias she replaced every few months. Inside, the air smelled like pot roast and starch. Darlene was already there, of course, standing by the fireplace with her personal photographer. A man in a slim-cut shirt, snapping away as she posed next to framed family photos she'd probably curated just for the shoot. "Oh, Carolyn," she said when she saw me, as if I were unexpected. "Do me a favor and hold the baby? Rachel needs a hand with her curls, and we're almost done." Before I could say anything, someone passed me my cousin's infant, and I found myself standing in the corner, cradling a child while everyone else huddled in front of the camera, arms around each other. I wasn't in a single shot. During the meal, I sat at the far end of the table, right between a bowl of peas and the stack of napkins. Conversation swirled around Darlene's latest feature in some women's entrepreneur magazine. Someone brought up her recent panel talk in Chicago. She batted her lashes and brushed it off, but not really. At one point, she turned to Mom and said, "I told the editor our strength came from how we were raised, that we were taught to lead by example." Mom smiled and said, "That's right, you always had the spark." Then, as if on cue, she turned to me and added, "And you've always been quiet, which is your gift. Not everyone needs to be loud to matter. Let Darlene speak, she was born for it." I set my fork down slowly, not slamming it, but enough to hear the metal touch porcelain. I looked at her, really looked, not just at her face, but at the way she tilted her chin toward Darlene, proud, leaning in. And I realized that this wasn't just about Darlene stealing the spotlight. It was about the way everyone else kept handing it to her without question. The next hour passed with me passing dishes, refilling water glasses, and helping clear plates. I didn't say much. Nobody seemed to notice. After dessert, I offered to do the dishes. It wasn't habit. It was survival. I needed something to keep my hands moving. In the kitchen, with my arms deep in soapy water, I could hear them in the next room. Mom and Darlene, voices lowered, but not enough. "She seems content enough," Mom said. "Let her feel useful, it keeps her occupied." I gripped a glass a little tighter than necessary, then eased off before it cracked. "She's never wanted more," Darlene replied. "Some people are just meant to stay in the background." I rinsed the plate I was holding and placed it carefully into the drying rack. Then I washed another. Then another. My breath came in evenly. Too evenly. When I finished, I wiped my hands, hung the towel back where it belonged, and walked out without a word. Nobody noticed I'd left the room. That night, back in my apartment, I pulled out my notebook. Under the previous entries, I wrote a new line. Verbal minimization, 2 witnesses. Internal narrative framed by others. Reinforced perception. Background role, Siu, comfort zone. I looked at those words for a long moment. Then I flipped the page and wrote something else. Something simple. They don't ask why I stay quiet. Because they need me to be. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the lamp. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because they never listened anyway. The next morning, I got up before the sun. The apartment was still dark, and the city hadn't quite come alive yet. I moved through my routine in silence. Coffee, hair pulled back, uniform shirt buttoned halfway, before I remembered to tuck it in. There was something about early mornings like that. A calm before the current picked up and reminded me I wasn't swimming. I was surviving. The air outside had a bite to it, even in spring. By the time I pulled into the North Stone lot, there were already 2 catering vans and a pop-up tent being erected out front. Another one of Darlene's brand days, from the looks of it. Probably something with local press, fake smiles, and quotes about legacy and community values. I clocked in through the staff entrance, swiped my ID badge, and started prepping the mop cart. But as I wheeled it toward the lobby, the security guard stepped into my path. "Sorry," he said, one hand up. "They're filming in the front hall today, closed to non-essential personnel until noon." I held up my ID. "Custodial," I said. "I know," he replied, lowering his voice. "It's not me, it's her team. They submitted a restricted list. You're not on it." Over his shoulder, I could see them. Darlene, in a cream suit this time, standing under the North Stone logo, shoulder to shoulder with board members, smiling like it didn't take effort. She laughed, tilted her chin to the left, moved her hand to the right, every gesture intentional, camera ready. My mop bucket sat behind me, water still warm. I didn't move, not yet. "Look," the guard added, awkward now. "If you want, I can page someone from ops." "No need," I said. I stepped back, wheeled the cart in the opposite direction, and didn't look at her again. Not in that moment. By noon, I had cleaned 3 levels of break rooms and replaced 10 soap dispensers. I was restocking the paper towels in the basement lounge when the door creaked open. It was Miguel's daughter, Jada. She came every so often when her school was out, quiet, sharp-eyed, with a sketchbook always tucked under her arm. "Hey, Miss Carolyn," she said, plopping down near the vending machine. I smiled. "Hey, Peanut. Your dad upstairs?" She nodded. "He's doing the boardroom. He said to wait here and not touch anything sharp." I chuckled and handed her a juice box from the fridge. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she tilted her head toward me and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do the men in suits always stop talking when you walk by? And why do they all call you ma'am if your badge says custodian?" I blinked. Kids don't play the politics adults do. They see what's there and what isn't. I crouched beside her, rested my forearms on my knees, and looked her in the eyes. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "you don't need a loud title to make people notice you. You just have to stay long enough for the truth to show up." She nodded like she understood, then took a sip of her juice. Later that evening, after the building had cleared out and most of the lights were dimmed, I walked the empty halls, not for work this time, but for something else. I still wore my uniform, still pushed a cart, but I wasn't cleaning. I walked past the media suite and paused at the door. Inside, Darlene was rehearsing a group of interns for an upcoming internal promo video. She was instructing them how to pose, where to place their hands, when to nod. One of the interns, a tall girl with braids and a nervous smile, raised her hand. "Should we include Ms. Carolyn in the profile series? She's got the longest record here, right?" Darlene didn't miss a beat. "We're focusing on visible faces. Public familiarity helps with brand alignment. Carolyn's not really on message." Not on message. I reached into my pocket, tapped the voice memo button on my phone, and let it run for 30 seconds. Then I stopped it, saved the file, and timestamped it. Back at my locker, I pulled out the folder. The one with the original paperwork, the sealed copy of Dad's share transfer, my amended name change, everything in order. I didn't open it, not yet, but I placed it gently on the top shelf, facing out. They weren't just pretending I wasn't part of the story. They were rewriting the whole damn thing like I'd never existed at all. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw cropped photos, fading names, and a long line of moments where I had bitten my tongue for the sake of keeping the peace. Sunday night, after I cleaned out the top shelf of my hallway closet, I finally found it. The fireproof lockbox I hadn't touched in over a decade. I placed it on the kitchen table, still dusty from where it had been shoved behind old blankets. It took me 2 tries to get the combination right. When the latch popped, something in my chest shifted. The smell of old paper hit me first, faintly metallic and dry. Inside, everything was still there. The certified copy of my name change, dated 6 months after my father died. The state seal pressed deep into the page like it hadn't aged a day. I remembered the conversation with Darlene when I told her I'd filed for it. She had rolled her eyes over the rim of her coffee mug and said, "Seriously? Who changes their name just because they got a few shares?" I just stood there, holding the envelope. I didn't reply. Not then. Nobody had asked about it again, not even Mom. I hadn't changed it for show. I did it because the shares were transferred in my full legal name, Carolyn Elise Marceau. And for the first time, I wanted to make sure my name lined up with something that couldn't be erased, blurred, or cropped out. Back in the present, I laid the certificate on the table and smoothed it flat with both hands. The same name that no one bothered to pronounce correctly at work was written here in bold black ink, attached to legal weight they had all chosen to ignore. But I hadn't ignored it. Beneath the certificate was another envelope, this one heavier, thicker, yellowed slightly around the edges. I opened it carefully. Inside was the original document my father had signed, transferring 52% of the company shares to me. Not Darlene, not our cousins, not Mom, just me. It was signed in ink, dated, notarized, and witnessed, legally binding. And for 15 years, I had done nothing with it. I had kept it in this box like a secret, waiting, watching, filing away the moments when someone laughed too loud at my expense or erased my name from yet another list. Because power doesn't always come from speaking first. Sometimes it comes from being the only one who remembers everything. That evening, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I created a new file and titled it, Voting Control Active. I attached scans of both documents and saved them twice. One copy on the desktop, one on an external hard drive I kept in the back of the pantry behind the old cereal boxes. Then I printed 3 hard copies and tucked them into a fresh folder. I labeled it plainly, Legal Authority, Internal Use. When I closed the lid of my laptop, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. I didn't need applause. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. Monday morning arrived with the same gray clouds stretched low over the skyline. Traffic was light, and the usual static buzz of the local news played low on my car radio. Nothing had changed, not on the surface. But I had. I wore my usual uniform, blue coveralls, name tag still attached. But this time, I carried a manila envelope under my arm instead of a mop handle. When I entered the building, I didn't head to the custodial closet. I walked straight to the elevator. The receptionist looked up from her desk as I passed but didn't stop me. I didn't offer a smile. I didn't need permission. In the hallway near the executive wing, I stopped by my locker. Old, scratched, paint chipping off the edges. I opened it slowly and slipped the envelope onto the top shelf. On the outside, I had written, "In case of legal denial, deliver to legal counsel, Tom Halberd." Tom had been my father's attorney, still on retainer, still loyal to his signature. With that done, I walked to the lobby. The large glass display was still up, still gleaming in the morning light. The photo collage hadn't changed. I was still missing. But I didn't feel small this time. I stood there for a few minutes, watching Darlene's smiling face framed in gold, surrounded by words like visionary, pioneer, and legacy. And I smiled back, quietly. It wouldn't be there much longer. I didn't head home after my shift. I stayed behind. It wasn't unusual. Cleaners often worked odd hours. The night crew sometimes needed coverage, and nobody questioned me if I stayed late with a mop in hand. But this time, I wasn't there for scuff marks or spilled coffee. Around 7:45 p.m., after the last group of middle managers had cleared out, I made my way to the basement level. The server access room was located just past the old copy center, down a hallway no one ever seemed to bother locking. The keypad beeped once, then opened. I'd used this route before, plenty of times. Nobody had ever stopped me. Why would they? Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, cool air buzzing from the vents to keep the servers running efficiently. My ID badge granted me enough access to clean the network room, but I didn't bring a mop tonight. I brought a USB stick and a reason. I approached the terminal in the far corner, the one not logged out properly. Most people assumed no one down here had the know-how to do more than vacuum. They were wrong. I typed in a user search, darlene.knorthstonegroup.com. Thousands of emails. I narrowed the filter, internal PR threads, HR coordination, outgoing reports to the board. Then I set the date range. I wasn't looking for broad strokes. I wanted the last 12 months, the cover-up phase, the peak of her campaign. A folder titled Legacy Content, Final Edits, caught my eye. Inside were notes marked, Remove staff names from image credits, Adjust quote attribution, CM to DK, and one labeled simply, Quiet ones don't sell. That one stung more than I expected. I downloaded everything, flagged the auto-delete scripts still active on 3 folders. She'd tried to erase the audit trails, but the logs were recoverable. People forget that even deleted data leaves fingerprints. It took 15 minutes. I encrypted the file, backed it up to a second drive, and shut the terminal down. When I left, I flicked the lights off like nothing had happened. The next morning, I arrived early, before the front office buzz began, before Darlene's voice took over the floor. I sat in the break room, logged into the employee portal, and went to the legacy team page. My name was gone. Not just hidden, removed. I clicked View Cached Page in the browser. An earlier version popped up, just 5 days old. My name, still listed under Operational Founders, sat right there. Carol Marceau, Facilities Oversight. I took a screenshot, then another. I checked my HR profile. It now said, Custodial External Support, not eligible for equity incentives. That last part stopped me cold. Equity incentive status doesn't apply to me. I didn't earn my shares through employment. I inherited them. Darlene knew that, but someone had manually edited my designation anyway. Tampering. I pulled the folder from my locker, the one I'd prepped and labeled over the weekend, and opened it on the small table. Inside were the notarized documents, the share transfer, and the original legal copy of my name change. The data I had downloaded last night was already printed, organized, color-coded by timestamp. Then I compiled one new cover sheet. Subject: Tampering, Fraud, Obstruction of Founding Rights. Under that, I included a one-line summary. As the majority shareholder, I am submitting formal notice of review. I slipped everything into a fresh envelope, labeled it, Board Copy, Confidential. At 10:17 a.m., I left the break room and walked up to the executive floor. The hallway was quiet. Most of the board members were at a quarterly breakfast meeting off-site. Only the assistant board secretary was in her office, sorting through minutes and receipts. She looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" "This is time-sensitive," I said, setting the envelope on the edge of her desk. She glanced at the label. Her face shifted, surprised, then unreadable. "I'll make sure the board gets it." "Thank you," I replied, and left without saying another word. I didn't need a scene. I didn't need applause. What I needed was already in motion. Later that afternoon, I walked past the front lobby again. The display was still up, unchanged. My photo still missing. Darlene's quote still at the center. "We are built on boldness." I looked at the reflection of my face in the glass. Not faded. Not soft. just present. They thought if they deleted me from the files, the folders, the wall, maybe I'd vanish. They were wrong. Some ghosts don't stay buried. After I left the secretary's office that morning, I didn't return to the break room. I didn't go back to the service elevator either. I walked out the side door, got into my car, and drove 2 blocks away to a quiet parking lot behind a coffee shop. From there, I opened my tablet, logged into the internal company stream, and waited. That day was the company's Women Who Lead event, an internal live stream meant to showcase female leadership at Northstone. They called it empowerment. I called it branding. Darlene was the final speaker. She always was. The closing act, the polished voice, the face they chose when they wanted to appear progressive but safe. She walked on stage in a navy blazer that matched the company colors, microphone clipped to her collar, smile easy. She sat down across from the PR manager and crossed her legs slowly, the way she always did when she wanted attention but pretended she didn't. They talked about legacy, about company values, about hard work and vision. Then came the last question. Has your family been a source of inspiration in your career? She paused, just for effect, then smiled. Well, she said, letting the audience chuckle before she even delivered the punchline. My sister's always been behind me. I mean that literally. She's one of the janitors. The crowd laughed, full, sharp, unfiltered. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. I tapped the record button. The stream was being archived anyway, required for HR compliance. But I wasn't taking any chances. Her words were clear. On camera, public. When the camera cut back to the moderator, Darlene turned to the side, speaking off mic but still audible. People like her are good for background shots, silent support. I hit stop, saved the file, filed it with the others. That afternoon, around 2 ways, I returned to my desk in the operations wing. As I was sorting through invoices, an auto-transcription email popped up in my inbox, internal voicemail. The message was short, sent from Darlene's private extension. Her voice was clipped, irritated. Just make sure she doesn't get in the door tomorrow. Tell security she's a compliance risk. And whatever she handed to the board, burn it. She hung up. The system had routed it to my desk by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. I read the transcript twice before forwarding it to IT and legal. I didn't include commentary, just one line. This reached me in error. Forwarding in case needed. No drama, no added emotion. Mic drop, clean and dry. The next morning, I woke early. Didn't feel nerves. Just calm. I arrived at Northstone just after 7:30. The parking lot was already half full. Banners had been placed outside the main entrance, announcing a new branding campaign. Northstone, built from within. A photographer was setting up near the lobby. Press badges hung around the necks of 2 local journalists. And there was Darlene, in a fitted red blazer, flanked by 2 members of her team. She looked confident, in control, until she reached the security gate. She raised her badge and swiped. Nothing. She swiped again. Red light. One of the security guards stepped forward, quiet but firm. Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me. Her smile faltered. She looked at her team, then the cameras, then back to the guard. There must be a mistake, she said. Try again. He shook his head. Your access is under administrative review. What? She snapped. Who authorized that? Behind her, a few employees had stopped walking. The hallway quieted. And then I walked in. Clipboard in hand, dressed in my regular coveralls, hair pulled back the same as always. She saw me. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, she didn't have a line prepared. I nodded politely, didn't break stride, and continued past her toward the elevators. My badge beeped. Green light, access granted. I didn't need to look back. Her badge didn't work. But mine finally did. I stepped off the elevator just as the conference room doors were being closed. The quarterly shareholder meeting had already begun. I didn't rush. I walked the length of the hallway at a steady pace, clipboard in one hand, black folder under the other arm. I passed familiar faces, people who'd walked by me in break rooms for years without ever learning my name. They watched me now, not because I was loud, not because I announced myself, but because I didn't flinch. Darlene's seat was empty. Of course it was. The boardroom felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe I was just more aware of everything. Who sat where, who looked up when I entered, who avoided eye contact. I didn't wear a power suit. I wore what I always did. Navy blue coveralls with my name stitched just above the chest pocket. Carolyn. Someone cleared their throat as I reached the head of the table. I set the black folder down, looked each of them in the eye. Before we begin, I said, I'd like to introduce myself. No one spoke. I'm Carolyn Marceau, I continued, calm, even, and I own 52% of Northstone Group. A hush settled over the room like a dropped curtain. I opened the folder, removed the documents, and began passing them out one by one. Not rushing, not pausing. Inside, a notarized share transfer from my father, screenshots of Darlene's internal edits, copies of deleted employee acknowledgments, a printed email chain with timestamps, HR actions, data logs, the voice recording from the stream. The voicemail transcript Darlene never knew reached me. The only sound was the shuffle of paper. One of the board members, Cynthia, I think, finally spoke. Is this all verified? I nodded. It's all signed, dated, and backed up. Legal counsel has a sealed copy. A man near the end of the table let out a breath, leaned back in his chair. Someone whispered, Is this a joke? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. This, I said, placing it gently in front of the assistant chair, is footage of Darlene publicly mocking Northstone employees during a live stream. It also includes an off-camera segment where she outlines a strategy to suppress internal recognition in favor of self-promotion. It was submitted for HR compliance archival. I'm simply returning it to the appropriate audience. The assistant turned to a junior staffer. Put it up. Moments later, the screen at the end of the room flickered to life. Darlene appeared, smiling in high definition. Her voice played clearly. The words were unmistakable. She's just a janitor. Background support, not brand forward. And then the punchline. That awful, too perfect smirk when she said, Balance, right? No one laughed now. The room didn't erupt. It shifted. Slowly. As if the collective weight of everything unspoken had landed on the table in front of them. One of the older members turned toward me. Why didn't you speak up sooner? I smiled faintly. I did. You just didn't see me. Silence again. And then, softly, from the legal counsel seated along the back wall, Ms. Marceau's majority holding entitles her to call a vote at any time. Her authority is valid. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pound my fist. I moved a motion forward. To reinstate all previously removed employee recognition entries, I said. To launch an internal ethics audit, and to restructure the leadership pipeline with new accountability guidelines. Nobody argued. No one called for clarification. The board passed the motion, unanimously. I didn't linger. I gathered the leftover copies into my folder and turned toward the exit. As I reached the hallway, I saw Miguel leaning against the wall just outside. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just gave me a quiet nod. I nodded back. In my hand was a photo, the one Darlene had cropped me out of, years ago. I had restored it digitally, printed it, framed it myself. The original background, the full team, no missing faces. I walked back to the boardroom door, found an open spot on the hallway wall just to the right of the corporate plaque, and hung it there. Carefully, deliberately, no announcement, no caption, just presence. I didn't walk in to take revenge. I walked in so they'd stop pretending I was never there. The next morning, the air felt different. I stepped into my office and paused just inside the doorway. The brass nameplate had been updated. It didn't shout. It wasn't gilded in gold or mounted on marble, but it was there. Etched clean, clear. Carolyn Marceau, chairwoman and majority owner. I sat down at the desk, the same one that once belonged to my father. It still had a slight wobble on the left leg and a scratch on the surface where he used to drum his pen. I never had it fixed. There was something honest in leaving it as it was. My phone buzzed, then again, and again. Email notifications, mentions, press inquiries. Some were from people I hadn't heard from in years. Reporters, ex-colleagues, even a local podcast host who once said I was too internal-facing to be story-worthy. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I clicked on the inbox from Miguel. Just one message, no subject, no pleasantries, just an attachment. I downloaded the image, an old team photo from a decade ago. The one Darlene had once claimed was lost due to quality control. In it, we were all there. Janitorial, admin, maintenance, smiling, tired, real. I hit reply, typed one word. Frame. Then I stood, stretched my back, and walked the photo down to facilities. I handed it directly to Miguel and said, "Put it where everyone walks past, eye level." He nodded, took it from my hands gently, like something sacred. I didn't go back to my desk right away. Instead, I took the long route through the East Wing, the one lined with portraits of Northstone's founding members. Men in dark suits, all captured mid-gesture or mid-laugh, as if the camera had caught them in the act of being important. At the end of the hallway, I stopped and looked at the last frame, a black canvas with nothing inside. "Reserved for next generation legacy," the plaque said. I didn't need my photo there. It wasn't the wall that mattered anymore. Later that afternoon, I sat in my office, holding the framed picture I'd hung outside the boardroom the day before. The restored photo. Me. Full frame. No edits. I heard my office phone ring, but let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I checked it. It was from my mother. "I don't understand all this," she said. "I really don't. I just hope you're not doing this out of spite. Darlene's going through a lot. I don't know what you're trying to prove anymore." I didn't call her back. I didn't scream or cry or even sigh. I whispered to myself as I placed the photo gently on the shelf above the window. I'm doing it because I should have never had to disappear just to be tolerated. Outside, the sun had dropped just low enough to cast long shadows across the floor. The building had started to quiet, but I didn't feel rushed. I had one more place to be. I drove out to the cemetery just after 5. It was quiet the way I remembered it. The wind shifted the branches just enough to make them creak. I parked near the far end, where the path forked toward the veterans section. My father's grave was simple, a small marker, clean, no extra quotes, just a name and 2 dates. I crouched beside it, pulled the velvet cloth from my bag, and placed the sealed company seal beside the headstone, the one he'd given me years ago. I had kept it hidden all this time, quiet, protected, untouched. "I kept my promise," I said softly. "I stayed until they saw it for themselves." I didn't need him to say anything back. I stayed for a few minutes longer, watching the light change, letting the silence hold space for what I never got to say while he was alive. Then, before leaving, I checked my phone one last time. One new message, from Jada. It read, "You're the first woman I've seen lead without yelling. I want to be like you." I read it 3 times. Each time, it hit a little deeper. I closed the message, turned off the phone, and slid it into my coat pocket. Then, I walked back to my car. Slowly, coat pulled tight against the wind. The sky had turned a soft gray, the kind that didn't feel heavy, just honest. I wasn't rewritten into the story. I rewrote where the story begins.